Hello guys, Professor O'Brien here giving you a short lecture uh, based around McGraw-Hill, chapter 35, sentence variety and emphasis. A short lecture because we've seen most of this in previous classes, so all this chapter really does is remind us of things that we've done, particularly with our other text, Cullen and Gray, Rhetorical Grammar. Uh, Particularly with beginning writers and ESL writers, there's a tendency for students to stick to the simple because they know the simple works. They know that that will satisfy and may be more likely to be grammatically correct than an experimental sentence. But I'm here to tell you that it's worth experimenting, writing more, and particularly varying the shape of the sentences you write. Now, I'm not going to read them out, but if you look at the two paragraphs provided, for example, on page 689, you'll see exactly what I mean. The first consists overwhelmingly of simple sentences, one clause, and by sentence 3 you're asleep because it's so monotonous. The structure doesn't change. Look, however, at the repaired passage immediately beneath it, and what you'll find there is most of the fix involves complex sentences with a variety of subclauses in a variety of places. And that's what you want to do. You want to mix things up, make your sentences longer and more complex if you tend towards the simple sentence too much. Now, page 690, section 45a, gives you some examples for what you can do at the start of a sentence. And remember, that's a good place for transition. And there are particularly two examples they provide: adverbial modifiers, which we've seen previously in this class, and adjectival modifiers, which we've also seen elsewhere in this class. Now, the example provided for adverbial modifiers in this case, in these cases, are an adverb and an entire prepositional phrase behaving like an adverb. So Armstrong's innovations eventually became the standard. Fine, but let's add some sauce. And we do that by simply moving eventually to the start of the sentence. Remember, adverbs and adverbials can move. Don't be afraid to experiment with their movability. Eventually, Armstrong's innovations became the standard. Now that sounds like there's a little more life in that sentence. The original sentence is fine; it's not dead, but but moving the adverb to the start of the sentence changes a lot. The second example: this money-making strategy backfired in at least 2 instances. Again, fine, but why not add some sauce again by moving that prepositional phrase, which is behaving adverbially, to the start of the sentence? In at least 2 instances, this money-making strategy backfired. Now, you can do the same with adjectival modifiers. These are just words and phrases that behave like adjectives. And you will recognize these from other portions of the course. They're often called absolutes as well, absolute phrases, because although you typically find present participles and past participles in them, you don't find tensed verbs in them, because of course that would make them clauses, wouldn't it? So Joseph, comma, pushing the other children aside, comma, demanded that the teacher give him a cookie first. Now that's a nice sentence as it is, but we could just as easily move the participial phrase to the front, as the text suggests. Pushing the other children aside, Joseph demanded that the teacher give him a cookie first. Now, I'm not saying one sentence is better than the other in that case, but I am saying that every so often you're going to want to introduce a little variety to your sentences, and this is one way of doing it. Now, note the boxed caution 2/3 of the way down the page here. If you're putting absolute phrases in, if you're putting participial phrases in, make sure that the doer of the action in the participial phrase is the subject of the main clause, because otherwise you're going to have dangling modifiers, and you don't want that. Now, by the same token, although it's not quite a sentence opener, I'm sorry, I take that back. I was thinking of clauses. That sentence opening position is a perfect way of introducing transition. So concept 1 in sentence 1 gets connected to concept 2 in sentence 2 through a transitional phrase, which as often as not is adverbial, but maybe adjectival. She usually walks in the park in the afternoon. Today, however, she stayed inside because it was raining. And you can see what the opening portion of the second sentence is doing. It's setting up sentence 2 in opposition to the material in sentence 1. Okay. Do note, however, there are some modifiers. This is the box at the top of page 691 that pull the verb forward. You might, particularly if you're coming from an ESL background or another linguistic background, rarely Simon has tried harder, etc., etc. No. Some adverbs, rarely and never are good examples, pull the verb to the start, or at least pull the tensed verb to the start. Rarely has Simon tried harder at work. Again, the second example, never did we expect such a difficult assignment. Never have we expected, or whatever it might be. Exercise 45.1 is excellent. I recommend you do it. Now, 45b, beginning at the top of page 691, asks you and strongly suggests that you make your sentences, that you vary your sentences in length and structure, and do so by using coordination and subordination. Now, we've spoken about clauses in the past, particularly subclauses. Subclause contains some form of subordinator that puts it in a subordinate relationship to the main clause. Typically, it explains what's happening in the main clause, or sets itself opposite to what's happening in the main clause. So the subclause beginning because in the following is a fine example. John could not go to school because he was suffering from the flu. Now, you could break that into two sentences. John could not go to school, he had the flu. But there's no relationship between those two sentences, that's clear. The subordinator, because, shows the relationship. Okay. Note the second point in the second paragraph from page 692. Not all of your sentences need to be complex. Sometimes, to shake things up, it'll be just as good to put in a simple sentence. So the point is, variety is the spice of life. When you're using complex and coordinate sentences, throw in a simple sentence. When you're using too many simple sentences, consider converting them to complex sentences. 45C asks you to consider using cumulative sentences. And cumulative sentences, essentially, it's kind of absolutes again, if you like. What you get is the main clause, then followed by several participial phrases which offer more information. There's only going to be one tensed verb in the following sentence, but there are going to be 4 separate actions. The motorcycle spun out of control, plunging down the ravine, crashing through a fence and coming to a rest at last on its side. You can see there are 4 actions there, but only the first verb is tensed. The other example, periodic sentences, simply suggests that it's okay sometimes to have to introduce a phrase for rhetorical effect. So you'll see, I'll just give the example of the first fix at the top of page 693, where the participial phrase gets set off from the rest of the sentence and in essence is an orphan, but it's pretty clear what it's doing because of the dash at the end of the sentence. In 1946 and 1947, young people turned away from the horrors of World War II and fell in love with the jukebox. I think exercise 45.2 is an excellent exercise as well. In 3 separate examples, you're given a string of sentences which you are being asked to turn into a single sentence with subclauses. Essentially, you're trying to find some way to fit all but one of those sentences inside a sentence as subclauses. You might find these more often in speeches or in college essays, but 45D suggests that you occasionally try inversions or rhetorical questions or exclamations. Now, you'll remember the examples we had of sentence order being changed in previous classes. Typically, you'd expect the following. You could expect a sentence like, Smith's work encompasses bold design and original thinking. Yes, the bold design and original thinking is characteristic of Smith's work. Sorry. So why not just take what's after is and put it at the start of the sentence? Characteristic of Smith's work are bold design and original thinking. Reversing the expected order of a sentence's elements, as long as the meaning is still clear, is a fine rhetorical strategy. Rhetorical questions. If you've ever been in a college debating society or a school essay writing society or something like that, you're probably used to the rhetorical question. And there's a fine example at the top of page 695 there. Players injured at an early age too often find themselves without a job, etc. Is it any wonder that a few turn to drugs and alcohol, become homeless, or end up in a morgue long before their time? ? Rhetorical questions are clearly answered already. It's always suggested to public speakers, do not ask a question unless you know what the answer is going to be. In this case, it's pretty clear what the answer is going to be. Exclamations are fine, but I have told style students in the past, and I'm going to say it again, I give you a gift now of 3 exclamation marks. You may use those exclamation marks carefully because you only get 3 for the rest of your lives. Exclamation marks should be rare, rare, rare. Now, on the other hand, I like the example that the text provides. Wordsworth completed the 13-book Prelude in 1805 after 7 years of hard work. Instead of publishing his masterpiece, however, he devoted himself to revising it. For 35 years! Exclamation mark. Now, I think that exclamation mark is deserved. A 35-year revision of a 7-year project is worth talking about. Note the repetition, the allowable repetition provided by example at the bottom of page 695. The costumes were red, the lights were red, and the props were red. Clearly, the writer has some comment to make about red. This isn't an example. It's not poorly placed repetition. It's an emphasis on the word red. So that's all I have to say, except tackle exercise 45.4 yourselves. The passage as it stands is very monotonous. See if you can use the strategies provided in chapter 45 to alter this passage to improve its style. So there, I am going to leave things at that, and I hope you get some use or enjoyment out of this lecture.